The church doors groaned as they swung open, announcing my entrance with a reluctant whimper. The air inside was heavy with the scent of aged wood and candle wax, a mixture that carried the weight of 1,000 whispered prayers. Stained glass windows stretched high above, casting fractured colors onto the stone floor, but the radiance did little to chase away the ever-present dimness that clung to the corners. St. Augustine's had stood in this town for over a century, its walls absorbing every confession, every sorrow, and every secret. As a journalist, I had covered stories of all kinds: political scandals, unsolved murders, human interest pieces that tugged at the heart, but never before had I been drawn to something as intangible as a presence. I had come to investigate a rumor, one that had spread through the town like the tolling of a distant, unseen bell. A man, always seated in the fourth pew from the front, always silent, always there. No one knew his name, and no one had ever seen him arrive or leave. Intrigued, I took a seat in one of the back rows and observed. The pews were sparsely occupied, an elderly woman with a lace headscarf murmuring prayers, a young couple whispering reverently, a hunched priest lighting votive candles. But there, exactly where the stories had said he would be, sat a solitary figure in the fourth pew. The man was dressed in an outdated black suit, the kind one might wear to a funeral decades ago. His posture was rigid, hands resting on his lap, head slightly bowed. He did not fidget, did not turn pages in a hymnal, did not acknowledge the presence of others. He simply sat a day. For nearly an hour, I watched him. He never moved. It wasn't until the church's old grandfather clock struck 7 that I looked away, distracted by the sound. When I turned back, my breath caught in my throat. The man was gone. I had not seen him stand, had not heard footsteps retreating down the aisle, had not witnessed the doors open or close. Yet the pew where he had been seated was empty, save for a single, folded piece of paper resting on the polished wood. Heart pounding, I stepped forward and picked up the note. The paper was old, its edges yellowed, the ink faded as though it had been written years ago. The message was brief, scrawled in uneven handwriting. You are not the first to look for me. You will not be the last. But some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. A chill crawled up my spine as a gust of wind swept through the church, though the doors remained firmly shut. And from somewhere deep within the cavernous shadows of the nave, I thought I heard the faintest whisper of a man's voice. Laughing. The note trembled between my fingers, though I couldn't tell if it was from the chill in the air or something deeper, something instinctive, primal. The church was silent again, but the memory of that whisper, that distant laughter, clung to me like damp fog. I scanned the empty pews. The elderly woman was gone. The young couple had vanished. Even the priest who had been tending the candles was nowhere to be seen. Had I truly been alone this entire time? I shoved the note into my pocket and took a step toward the altar, drawn forward by some unseen force. The flickering candlelight danced across the crucifix, casting restless shadows along the high stone walls. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, each one louder than the last, as if something unseen was matching my pace. Then, just as I reached the fourth pew, the air shifted. A sound, barely more than a breath, whispered against my ear. You shouldn't be here. I spun around, my pulse hammering. The pews were empty. The church doors remained closed. But the scent of something old, something decayed, lingered in the air. It wasn't the comforting aroma of ancient wood and wax, but something damp and earthen, like the disturbed soil of a long-forgotten grave. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I had come here for a story, and I wasn't going to let shadows and whispers scare me away. Moving carefully, I slid into the fourth pew, occupying the exact spot where the man had been sitting. The wood was colder than expected, almost as if it had been left outside in the winter air. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, searching for anything, carvings, notes, some sign of who he was or why he always sat here. My hand caught on something. A name. Faint, almost worn away, but still legible, Samuel Thorne. The name meant nothing to me, but the moment my eyes traced the letters, a sound filled the church, a deep, low creaking, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. The candles flickered violently, their light shrinking away from the altar. And then I felt it. A presence. It pressed against my skin like static before a lightning strike, an invisible weight settling beside me. Though my eyes told me I was alone, every nerve in my body screamed that I was not. I turned my head slowly. And there he was. The man in the fourth pew. But now, he was looking at me. His face was pale, too pale, his eyes hollow pools of shadow. His lips were cracked, barely parted, and though he made no sound, I felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against my skull. I tried to move. My body refused. Then, in the silence, his lips curled into a smile, small, knowing, something between amusement and warning. The candles snuffed out all at once, plunging the church into absolute darkness. And in the blackness, that laughter returned, closer this time. Much closer. I don't remember standing. I don't remember running. All I know is that one moment, I was trapped in the fourth pew, staring into those hollow, smiling eyes. The next, I was outside the church, my breath ragged, my hands trembling, the night air clawing at my skin. The heavy wooden doors of St. Augustine's loomed behind me, closed tight as if they had never been opened. No sign of movement. No flickering candlelight from within. Just the echo of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. What had I seen? No. Who had I seen? I shoved my hands into my coat pockets, seeking warmth, and felt the crumpled paper still tucked inside. The note. The one left in the pew before the man disappeared. I pulled it out, smoothing its brittle surface, rereading the words under the dim glow of a street lamp. You are not the first to look for me. You will not be the last. But some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. A shiver coiled through me, though whether from the cold or the weight of the words, I couldn't tell. Samuel Thorne. That was the name etched into the wood of the fourth pew. A name that lingered on my tongue like a whisper from the past. Who was he? And why did I have the terrible feeling that he had just looked me in the eye? I needed answers. The town library was a relic of another time, its tall shelves crammed with the weight of forgotten knowledge. A sleepy librarian glanced up as I entered, her expression mildly surprised. Few people visited this late. I nodded politely and made my way toward the archives, the only place I might find something useful. Dust swirled in the air as I flipped through brittle newspaper clippings and yellowed records. My fingers moved quickly, seeking one thing, just one thing. There. A small article, nearly lost in the back pages of an old town gazette. Local tragedy. Man found dead in church. I skimmed the lines, my pulse quickening. Samuel Thorne, a resident of Black Hollow, was found unresponsive in the fourth pew of St. Augustine's church late last night. Witnesses say Thorne had been attending evening prayers alone when he suffered an apparent heart attack. He was discovered hours later, his body rigid and cold. No signs of struggle. No immediate next of kin. Dead. In the fourth pew. The date on the article was October 12, 1953. I sat back, my mind racing. It had been over 70 years, and yet, I had seen him. I had sat beside him. The silence of the library pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. The room felt darker now, the flickering bulbs above casting weak halos of light. For the first time since leaving the church, I felt it again, that sensation of being watched. I turned, slowly. In the reflection of the library window, beyond the rows of books and empty chairs, something stood behind me. A figure. Silent. Waiting. I spun around. Nothing. Just empty space. But the reflection remained. The man in the fourth pew. Watching. The reflection should not have been there. The library was empty, save for the librarian in her distant corner, flipping lazily through a magazine. The air smelled of paper and dust, undisturbed. There was no one behind me. And yet, in the window's glass, he remained. Samuel Thorne. Still dressed in that outdated black suit, still seated as if the wooden pew beneath him extended beyond time and space. But now, he was closer. His head was slightly tilted, his hollowed-out eyes locked onto mine through the warped reflection. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then, a flicker. A shift. The reflection's lips parted ever so slightly, just as they had in the church, as if whispering something I could not hear. The lights in the library dimmed. The air thickened. A cold whisper brushed against my ear. You shouldn't have looked for me. My body finally obeyed. I stumbled back, knocking into a chair, sending it clattering to the ground. The sound snapped the librarian's head up, her eyes narrowing in irritation. "Sir," she called. I blinked. The reflection was gone. There was nothing but empty glass and my own wide-eyed expression staring back at me. Sorry, I muttered, righting the chair. My pulse thundered in my ears as I snatched the newspaper clipping and shoved it into my pocket. Just lost my balance. The librarian squinted at me, clearly debating whether I was worth the trouble. Deciding I wasn't, she returned to her magazine. I needed to get out of here. The streets outside were almost deserted, the town wrapped in a heavy stillness that made my skin crawl. A few streetlights buzzed faintly, their glow barely cutting through the thickening fog. My car was parked 2 blocks away, but the distance felt longer now, the shadows deeper. I walked quickly, my breath misting in the cold air. My thoughts raced through everything I'd learned: Samuel Thorne, his death in the Fourth Pew, the note, the reflection that should not have been there. I had come to St. Augustine's looking for a mystery. I had found something else entirely. Halfway to my car, I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me, beside me. I snapped my head to the left. No one. The buildings stood dark and empty. The alleyways yawned like gaping mouths, swallowing the street's weak light. The footsteps continued. A steady, deliberate pace. Matching mine. I walked faster. So did they. A bead of cold sweat slid down my spine as I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. The footsteps stopped just as abruptly as they had started. I turned. The street was empty, but the car window, its reflection, was not. The man in the fourth pew was there again, his vacant eyes peering at me from the glass. This time, his mouth moved. Not a whisper. A single, voiceless word. Run. The car door flew open, though I hadn't touched it. A bitter wind rushed past me, carrying the scent of damp earth and old, forgotten places. And from the darkness behind me, so close I could feel its breath, something laughed. The laughter curled around me, thick as smoke, sinking into my skin. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I ran. I dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut, twisting the key with shaking fingers. The engine coughed, sputtered, come on, then roared to life. My headlights carved weak tunnels through the fog as I yanked the gear shift into drive and sped off, my tires screeching against the wet pavement. In the mirror, the street stretched behind me, swallowed by the mist. No figures. No footsteps. No sign that anyone, or anything, had ever been there. But I knew better. Samuel Thorne was not gone. He was with me. I could feel it. My apartment was on the 4th floor of an old brick building, the kind where the walls were thin, the radiators clanked in the night, and the halls always smelled faintly of mildew and someone else's cooking. The moment I stepped inside, I locked the door. Then I locked it again. I stood there for a long moment, my forehead pressed against the wood, my breathing uneven. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, too still. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but waiting. I turned on every light. The soft hum of electricity filled the space, a fragile comfort. I needed something normal, something that didn't feel like I was teetering on the edge of a nightmare. I pulled the newspaper clipping from my pocket, smoothing out the crinkled edges. Samuel Thorne, a resident of Black Hollow, was found unresponsive in the 4th pew of St. Augustine's Church. 70 years. I had never believed in ghosts. Not really. The idea was fascinating. Sure, good material for a story, but I had always been a man of facts. Of logic. And yet, logic had no place here. Not when I had seen him. Not when I had heard him. And then I noticed something. There, in the corner of the clipping, faded, almost illegible, was something I had missed before. Survived by one son, Peter Thorne. A son. That meant there was family. Someone who might know the truth. Someone who might tell me why Samuel Thorne still sat in that pew. I grabbed my laptop, my fingers flying over the keys as I searched for the name. The internet churned through records, old addresses, obituary listings. There. Peter Thorne. Still living. A retired professor. And his address? Not far. I exhaled, the first flicker of hope sparking in my chest. Finally, a lead. Then, a noise. A slow, deliberate creak. I froze, my pulse hammering. It had come from behind me. from the hallway leading to my bedroom. My breath came shallow, uneven. I turned my head, my muscles tight with fear. The door to my room was slightly ajar, though I knew I had left it shut. The air beyond it looked wrong, darker than the rest of the apartment, thick with shadow. I stood, every nerve screaming. Then, softly, from inside my room, "You found my name." The lights flickered, and the door, slowly, impossibly, began to open. The door inched open, its hinges groaning like an exhaled breath. The darkness inside my bedroom wasn't natural. It was thick, swallowing the light from the hallway. A void. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, from within the blackness, the voice came again. Low. Close. "You found my name." A gust of air, cold, damp, wrong, brushed against my skin, carrying the scent of old wood and something rotting. I took a step back. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the apartment, to leave everything behind. But something stronger, something colder, held me in place. The darkness shifted, and he stepped forward. Samuel Thorne. No longer just a reflection. No longer just a shadow seated in a church pew. He stood in my doorway now, his body rigid and impossibly still. His face was exactly as I had seen it before, pale, hollow-eyed, lips barely parted as if about to speak. But the worst part? His feet weren't touching the ground. He drifted closer, the air around him rippling like heat waves, though the room felt frozen. His suit was faded, frayed at the edges, his skin ashen, stretched too tight over his bones. And then, he smiled. Not kind. Not warm. A smile that did not belong on something dead. "You shouldn't have looked for me." The lights flickered violently. The laptop screen behind me glowed, casting long, warped shadows along the walls. I found my voice, though it came out strained, almost a whisper. "Who are you?" A slow blink. A tilt of the head. Then, "You already know." The room lurched. A deep, pulsing hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. The walls stretched, the floor tilted. No, not the floor. It was the light. The shadows were moving. The darkness behind Samuel grew, swallowing the corners of my bedroom, tendrils of it creeping toward me like reaching hands. "You opened a door." My breath hitched. "What door?" His blackened eyes bore into me. "You sat in my place." Suddenly, my legs worked. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair behind me. My laptop screen flickered wildly, and for a split second, the reflection in its glass showed something else. Not Samuel. Not only Samuel. Figures. Tall. Twisted. Standing in the void behind him. Waiting. A deep, guttural voice, not his, rumbled through the air. "One follows. Many listen." My vision blurred, my pulse a war drum in my skull. I turned, my fingers fumbling for my phone, for the door, for anything that would bring me back to the real world. And then, the lights died. Pitch black. A whisper, inches from my ear. "Now you belong to it, too." And the darkness swallowed me whole. There was no up or down. No floor beneath me. No walls. Only darkness. A silence so deep it felt alive. It pressed against my skin, wrapped around my throat. I wasn't standing. I wasn't falling. I simply was. Then, a sound. The slow creak of old wood bending under unseen weight. I turned, no, I felt myself turn, toward the sound, though I had no body anymore, only awareness. And there it was. The pew. A single beam of dim, grey light illuminated it, stretching into nothingness. The wood was cracked, splintered with age. The name carved into it, Samuel Thorne, was faded, but another name now sat beneath it. My own. I tried to move. I couldn't. Then, slowly, the light shifted, revealing someone seated there. Samuel. But different this time. His hollowed-out eyes no longer empty, but full, filled with something deep, ancient. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He simply stood. The moment he did, I felt it. The weight. The pull. I was being drawn downward, into the pew. My body, if I still had one, was sinking into the wood, my name etching deeper, becoming part of it. You sat in my place. Samuel's voice, but distant now, as if from another world. And now, it is yours. His figure blurred, dissolving into the shadows. His presence lifted, like a sigh escaping from the church rafters. The weight of decades lifted. He was gone. And I was here. I tried to scream, to fight, to claw my way out. But the darkness did not let go. The church doors groaned open. An elderly woman entered, crossing herself before taking a seat near the front. A young couple followed, whispering reverently. A hunched priest lit votive candles in the dim glow of the stained glass. And there, seated in the fourth pew, was a man in a black suit. Silent. Still. Watching. Waiting. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts. If you're craving more mysteries, thrillers, and spine-chilling tales, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss out on the next chapter. The darkness is always waiting, and the next story could be just around the corner. See you in the next one, if you dare.